Yeah.
This one, right.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the Francis Wilson Memorial, the third Francis Wilson Memorial Lecture. Both those of you here with us and those of you who are joining online. This is the culmination of an amazing day that we've had, starting with a retirement party for Murray and then celebrating SALDRU's 50 years. And so for those of you who've been with us all day, you're going to have to forgive me. There's going to be a little bit of recapping. But so maybe if you dozed off from time to time, this is your previously on. But yeah, bear with me. And for those of you who are just joining us now, you are most welcome, and it's wonderful to have you with us. So the Francis Wilson Memorial Lecture, the lecture named for a person whose intellectual courage and moral clarity helped define SALDRU, Data First, and much of South Africa's empirical research landscape. Francis Wilson was the founding director of the Southern African Labour Development Research Unit, SALDRU, and Data First. He is one of South Africa's most preeminent economic researchers, a scholar whose strong social conscience drove him to expose the hardship and poverty produced by the migrant labor system and the mining industry. He spearheaded the first nationally representative survey and fought tirelessly for open data, convinced long before it was fashionable that data was a public good. His research illuminated deep historical and contemporary forces shaping South African society. And importantly, definitely after all we have listened to today, he carried that scholarship into the public domain as part of a lifelong commitment to a more just society. Generations of students remember Francis as the person who showed them that economics is a discipline that could and should be used in the service of society. Tonight's lecture is being delivered by someone who has carried that torch with extraordinary integrity. Professor Murray Leibbrandt, who succeeded Francis as the director of SALDRU in 2001 and led it for more than 2 transformative decades. If Francis built the foundation of SALDRU, Murray ensured it flourished. Earlier today, Francis's wife, Lindy, noted that Francis felt, and I quote, blessed 1,000 times when Murray became the director of his most treasured SALDRU, describing him as the rare leader who never sought to erase what came before him, but instead appreciated the unit's origins and took SALDRU forward in an extraordinarily creative way into new fields while honoring its values and people. Murray. Murray Leibbrandt's career has been defined by a sustained commitment to understanding and addressing South Africa's poverty, inequality, and labour market dynamics through rigorous empirical research. His arrival at UCT in 1994 came at a pivotal moment. Just a year earlier, SALDRU and the World Bank had completed South Africa's first nationally representative living standards measurement survey, which provided a baseline for post-apartheid checking for improvements in living standards. So the data were enormously valuable, but we've also heard today there was very little South African capacity at the time to analyze these data. Murray, however, arrived having been trained in the US with exactly the skills the country needed at exactly the right time. Murray was driven by two principles that would underpin his career. Firstly, that South African researchers must be central to producing the evidence that informs national policy. And secondly, that such evidence must rest on rigorous data analysis and best practice methodology. These principles guided both his emerging research program and his parallel effort to build national capacity in empirical economics. In the years that followed, Murray became a leading advocate for longitudinal research in South Africa, co-founding the Cape Area Panel Study with colleagues from the University of Michigan, an interdisciplinary project that set the stage for a national panel. When the presidency decided in 2006 to launch the National Income Dynamics panel, Murray's expertise was central, and they came to SALDRU. As co-PI, he helped establish NIDS as South Africa's first national panel and built SALDRU into a national centre of excellence for running the NIDS survey and for many other surveys to follow. Today, NIDS remains one of the country's most important data sets for tracking social and economic inequality and mobility. Murray's research has shaped national and international debates on poverty and inequality. His work demonstrated that while South Africa reduced poverty in the post-apartheid period, mostly through the introduction of grants, inequality remained exceptionally high, driven primarily by labour market dynamics. He produced some of the most rigorous analyses of post-apartheid living trends, and while importantly, his panel data work generated deep insights into the lived realities behind these statistics. He served as the Pro Vice Chancellor for Poverty and Inequality at the University of Cape Town from 2013 to 2018. And over the past decade, he has extended this careful scholarship to the continent as Director of the Africa Centre for Excellence in Inequality Research within the African Research Universities Alliance. His research career spans decades of exceptional dedication to bringing rigorous scholarship to bear on the country and now the continent's most pressing concerns. Few academics have done more to help government decision makers make sense of the intricate and evolving realities of poverty and inequality. His influence reaches deeply into national policy making. His work has shaped deliberations within the Presidency, Treasury, Social Development, Statistics South Africa, and many other bodies. Reflecting on this role when receiving an honorary doctorate from the University of Free State, Murray observed, and I quote, "We academics in South Africa have the wonderful privilege of working very closely with the policy community. Far closer than what very famous professors do in other countries. We are called to be an engaged and contributing part of our country, and that is an extraordinary privilege, especially for me, who somehow from my earliest days have found a wonderful meshing of my academic work with what I wanted to do with my life. We roll up our sleeves and we do our work, trying to build a better country through our research and through our advice based on careful research. Taken together, Murray's contributions, spanning scholarship, data infrastructure, methodological innovation, capacity building, and policy engagement, have reshaped how South Africa understands itself. SALDRU's evolution, the strengthening of the national data system, and the emergence of a generation of researchers working on poverty and inequality all bear his imprint. SALDRU turns 50 this year. It is an institution built by many, but stewarded in its formative years by two remarkable scholars whose leadership had the same underlying texture: a fierce commitment to justice, a respect for evidence, a deep generosity towards students and colleagues, and a determination to leave South Africa better than they found it. Francis laid the foundations, Murray expanded and renewed them for a new generation. It is therefore deeply fitting that tonight's lecture, reflecting on the past 50 years and imagining the next 50, be delivered by Murray, who has lived so much of this journey and who exemplifies the values that Francis embedded in SALDRU's DNA. Please join me in welcoming Professor Murray Leibbrandt.
Sure, you need to retire, eh? Excellent, Murray Leibbrandt for more lecture. It's been an extraordinary day of celebrating SALDRU, of course, celebrating Francis, and in some senses, and celebrating, and it's all of us. I mean, one of the distinctive features of the day is, you know, we're talking about who works in SALDRU, but there's this diaspora. It's great. In some senses, this is a gathering of the diaspora. You know, and so it's really, so my job is to keep it fairly light tonight. Maybe they told me it's good education practice to be repetitive. So Kelly said a lot of the things I want to say are much better. There's repeating, so bear with me. So, yeah. So what we want to do is, let me just start with this in the beginning. So we'll start by saying a few things. So here's a view from an apartheid spy. So an UCT historian, Christopher Saunders, found this. It was whatever you called it, declassified. And so the spy was very critical of SALDRU for being the most influential non-aligned institution in the RSA. Obviously, that was the good old days. What a damning indictment. And then the person spoke of Professor Wilson, that he might have been communicating with the enemy. And he was condemned for being intelligent, sophisticated, well-informed, powerful, and shrewd. And that was in 1980, right? So SALDRU hadn't been going for that long. So what an impact this man had already by then. We'll say more about Francis and brushes with the authorities a little bit later as we go. You've got to pick a photo for Professor Wilson. So which one? So this is a bit of a quirky one, right? But this mini has come up a few times today, by the way. I liked it for that reason. Well, for that reason, I thought it might make a good joke about how many social sciences you can fit in a minute. But look at Francis. He's so happy. And he's convening something. This was a meeting of something called the Hubble Project, ISR project. I think Jeremy Seekings was involved in the project, actually. Why aren't you in the photo, Jeremy? But he's so happy. And he's entertaining people, and he's persuading them. He's giving a seminar, but a Francis type seminar around the Mini. And you can see there's some key people in this photograph. It was you can see Lindy, absolutely key. So one of the benefits we had from Francis's many retirements, he had 3. So this is my first one. So at least 2 to go. Always do what Francis. Anyway. And so we had the benefit, once he'd finished his work in Data First, then he finished in SALDRU, worked in Data First in the CSSR, and then he came to sit in SALDRU for quite a long time. So we had this amazing privilege of having SALDRU, Francis sitting in SALDRU in a very nice office with a glorious roll-top desk. And he was just in a very honest frame. So he shared with us a lot. He was always available to advise us. But what he said then was also more honest maybe than before, because, this line that we're trying to thread here with the hard heads, heads on ice and hearts on fire, is a tough one. It's the tough one to travel, and he needed Lindy. Lindy was his strength, actually, all the way through. So, thank you, Lindy. It's great to have you with us this evening. And then, of course, we've got some of our collaborators. It's going to be one of the themes of the evening. We've got just raised 2. Professor Featherman, David Featherman, who was the director of the ISR at that stage, and Professor Lamb, who were obviously part of this project. So that's why I like the picture. It's Francis convening stuff and just looking very happy doing it, and obviously with people. So that's, we traveled a long way with Francis. What we want to talk about tonight really is what foundation he laid for us, but more about what we've done the last while. It's more focused on us, and then a little bit about the future. Now you've got me, unfortunately, not for better or for worse. I'm wearing my SALDRU jacket. It's a bit tatty and jaded, like the person inside it. Of course, hearts on fire and heads on ice. That's quite a nice way of saying things, like nice to put this way. And so somebody earlier said it's a Russian author. Google told me it was Lenin. Lenin is a Russian author. My version, as I used all the way to my time in SALDRU, was hard heads and soft hearts. It's not nearly as nice. Right. That comes from Alan Blinder, an American economist who wrote a very good book. But the point's the same. And really, what I want to reflect on a little bit today, using much of the same material that we've had over the day, is about the package that is SALDRU and what makes SALDRU work, and the need and the partners that we've had, to make it all work, and therefore to be a little bit reflective about SALDRU going forward in the clouds. Okay. So this picture here, anyway, SALDRU at 30 was produced by Dudley Horner, also a crucial part of the story, walking alongside Francis for so long. If you want to get a detailed picture of the early period, well, you can go and look in the book. It's available on the SALDRU website. And when we celebrated SALDRU at 30, that was, were any of you there? Who was at SALDRU at 30? Quite a lot of you. That's wonderful. And you might remember it was a pretty raucous affair. It was actually Dudley's event, very much so. And so the union guys were there, and they were not well behaved. Gentile Vice Chancellor Ndebele was a little perturbed by all of us. It was, yeah. But anyway, so Dudley had his event, right? And the first period was celebrated. And so let's move on. In each instance, we'll talk about. Can I go back? Yeah. I want to talk about research as the foundation for it all. For SALDRU to have anything worth saying and worth convening around. Then I want to talk about data. And then coming back to this convening and partnerships. Then some speculation going forward, but I'll keep it. So when SALDRU, Francis had already written these books when he founded SALDRU. And there's the very famous book, Labour in the South African Gold Mines. And alongside that, there was a book that he'd written on migrant labour. He'd written a few things, actually. I'm just putting one up. And so that was Francis, right? That labour in the South African gold mines was pretty hard-headed analysis of gold mining, and so what was driving it, etc. But the human side of it, which he always insisted on, came very much into the picture through the migrant labour in South Africa that he wrote, and his work on the region, actually, and the devastating destruction caused by migrant labour to the social fabric of our society. So you've got this hard analysis about how the economy is working, but then you've got a counterposing analysis of, okay, but how's the society working around that economy? This is the famous graph that has been mentioned So influential work on social mobility, influential work on profiling poverty and inequality and putting it on the agenda. And if you think back up to the National Planning Commission, there was quite a big debate. Lots of stuff about we've got these triple challenges. Even then we had triple challenges, right? Poverty, inequality, and unemployment. But poverty, inequality was more or less the same thing. And there was quite a lot of inequality denialism. Look, it can't be stuck there. This is post-apartheid, etc. I think but by the Planning Commission, there was an ownership of inequality in our society as how our society was actually working. And then through these dynamic analyses, we could actually trace it out. I think the group in SALDRU that one of the there's lots of work on education in South Africa, and schools are classified into 5 quintiles. It would be pretty sad maths if it was 6 quintiles, 5 quintiles, right? But we know a lot about those quintiles. And basically, the story coming out of a lot of education research by SALDRU people, by the national group of researchers, is that the conditions in schools are such that you only get a big return from your education if you push yourself up into the 4th quintile. It's like a damning indictment. We made some progress in the country, but not nearly enough. So in this, we can see pictures of a rural KwaZulu family sending a child of theirs not to the nearest school, right? Because you can do geo-positioning and all of that stuff. They're not sending the kid to the nearest school. They're sending them around the mountain. And we can see in the data that it's costing them a lot of money. And we can see in the data that they've got the money's got to come from somewhere, and they don't have savings and stuff. So they're bearing a huge price to move the kid around. You mesh it with the admin data, and you work out, okay, they actually did bump their kid up. They bumped their kid from a quintile 2, I think it was, to a quintile 3 school. So they're doing exactly what any good parent should do, right? But at a considerable cost to themselves. Sketch it to the narrative of government delivery and where are we as a society with our education. And it's a sad tale, right? Because that's the best they can do. But it's not going to be, probably not going to be good enough to actually put them on a different trajectory in and of itself. That's how poverty traps work, actually. They've got these spots where you can slip back. So using the NIDS, I think we can trace this picture pretty well. And then there's a wealth of very detailed micro work that has been done in SALDRU on these education things from Cali, progress through school, very carefully analyzed. Nicola looking at the movements from secondary to tertiary and then into the labor market, to understand this really well. And it's not just education, it's Brendan and his human capital, it's health as well. To work out how our society's working to trap people and where the intervention spaces are for policy. Somebody said something really good. They were saying, I said it in my research. I didn't, but I'm owning it from now. It was Najwa this morning. She said, that that what she learned from SALDRU's research was that we were able to disentangle, okay, what's the individual effort here and what really is structural? Like what can't people do anything about, but it's really impacting on their lives? And that's where policy should be, right? So it's a great tribute, I think, to the unit that it's developed a core of work that shows these, why is our progress stunted in this country? It's always been SALDRU's mantle, and coming back to an old Francis theme, really, it's coming back to this thing about the post-apartheid society and with the burden of history. Well, you can point out the devastation and long-run scarring of apartheid. At the same time, you can have a picture that there's policy things that are working and not working, and you don't have to blame it all on the government and deny the burden of history. You can cope with both of them, and that's your responsibility as a researcher. Okay, of course. So Francis was not always popular for that picture of the devastation in our society. And here's something called an income tool that SALDRU derived and put up on the web. So what it is you get online and you've got to give people your income, your household size, and then it positions you in the South African income distribution. Sounds innocuous, right? Sounds like fun. And many people seem to have got on, but they didn't have so much fun because they found out that they were here, say, and that really unsettled them for some reason, right? So, school friends of mine, suddenly I got phone calls saying, how hard I'm working, like, I don't know how you get from here to there, but that's where they went, right? You know how expensive it is, to send my kid to Bishop's. Or even a good school. Anyway, but at that point, you can then have a fairly civil dialogue with your ex-friend at that moment about this, because the point of the tool was, okay, to tell South Africans, right, that there's lots of evidence that people don't understand where they are in South Africa's high inequality country. They just don't know where they are. And they do know they get it wrong downwards all the time, right? So that they know enough to get it wrong. So then you can find out where am I? And so I said, well, okay, but nobody's saying you're not a good dad, right? This tool doesn't tell you bad dad. You must give away your money and whatever. It doesn't say anything like that. I said the purpose of the tool was to prompt you, and you can scroll down there, and you can get a bunch of characteristics of the people who live down here. Like, don't you want to know? You just told me about your life. You're working really hard, and your kids are doing well, and it's a good story, right? And it's something you should be proud of. But don't you want to know how life works down at the bottom of our society? And of course, you can't really say no. Well, I suppose so. But nonetheless, anyway, my Brightflash invitations decreased. But those aren't the costs that Francis and me were bearing, right, at the time, for telling the truth. They were going to jail. etc. So it's a small price to pay, but nonetheless, that's your role in the society. Oh, why is it a tacky slide like this? You might have been wondering. Because we were using NIRS. Right, as government, we've got a data crisis in our country. And so we were using NIRS and updating it by the CPI, but that's a bit self-like silly, right? You're trying to tell a story about your country. If you keep updating it by the consumer price index, that makes a whole lot of horrendous assumptions. And so it's not up. But tomorrow, public announcement, the statistics are releasing the income and expenditure soon. And so we'll be back in play. We might even use data that we're working on in the tax lab to get the top end of the distribution right. So I'm committing by public commitment. I'm committing Benny's to getting the income to look again. Okay, sorry, I dwelled a lot on that. And a lot on research, because it's the foundation for everything else if you're going to be a research unit. Yeah, right? Yeah. Okay, so let me speed up. So data for the people. Let's talk about data. Quite a lot. Quality data. Not a very clear word. Quality data, and it starts with the PSLSD. So obviously there was the 84 conference. We'll come back to that earlier. It's another form of data gathering, but in terms of running surveys, this project, which we've heard quite a lot about today, was something that was brought. The SALDRU was asked to run on behalf of the new government in order to give some information base to carry forward our policy making going forward. And we had Trevor claiming some ownership of it today, and Dudley says it actually was Jane Naidu and Tabo. And but anyway, we're very happy to have everybody. I agree, SALDRU was the right place to run. So that's a huge credit to the unit. And so there's just a quote down here that I took out of the first Francis Wilson Memorial Lecture, the wonderful lecture that Angus Deaton gave 2 years ago. And it says such a lot about the Living Standards Measurement Survey and what SALDRU was asked, but then they ran with it. And I was talking to Nikki the other day, and she remembers being consulted a little bit on questionnaire design, right? And that's how it went. Right, we own the survey, much as Angus is saying down here. This is also an ad for data first, right? Because you can download the data very nicely curated, even and it set us on a different path, a slightly different path, where we got into surveys and capacity building around survey data. Over our period, most of what's happened subsequently is about panel data. And this is a quick slide, at least. We'll get through this quickly, but there's so much in this slide. These are the panel surveys that we've been involved in over this period, the main ones. And the Cape Area panel study has been much discussed. Perhaps missing from that we funded ourselves. And I think that's quite an important point, actually, that in this process of transition from Francis to us, to our SALDRU family, we had a lot of help from our partners. And some of the help was in writing grants. Some of the grants were training grants. Some of the grants were funding, like two successful applications to the National Institutes of Health to run the Cape Area panel study. And then I think missing from the previously in the day was that this was a partnership between with the University of Michigan and SALDRU and the Center for Social Science Research as well. So interdisciplinary in the Classic Institute for Social Research, I think. And then we've discussed already the income dynamic study, But the partner there was different. It was government, as Mistura told us really nicely on the previous panel. But nonetheless, without the partner, it's not going to happen. I can attest to that, because in 2003, David Lamb and David Fetterman, and maybe Nikki and Jeremy, or maybe back already, we hosted an event where we were speaking about running a national panel study in South Africa. We were trying to get a group of academics together to run a national panel study. And we didn't win. We had a lot of fun talking about it and stuff, and we knew what we were talking about, and we had the institute, the world champions in these panel surveys working with us, but we didn't win. And so we know that there was a market failure there. This country did need a panel survey. You know, when somebody, when a thunderbolt and lightning hit Thabo Mbeki, and he decided that we needed a panel survey, well, thank you, Lord, for that, right? And then it happened. But there's this foundation that we built to put this panel study in place, but it required the partnership with government to make it work. Having put that infrastructure in place, the SALDRU infrastructure, when the Nitzcram moment came, when coronavirus hit, it was there for the country. Right? So that's how these partnerships work. It's infrastructure for the country, with very competently managed. And so we were supposed to have shipped off the survey to Stats SA, and we had shipped off everything, including old computers that were cost the government. It was fruitless and wasteful expenditure to ship those surveys to Stats SA. But we still had, some digital records. So when we needed a base to run the Nitzcram survey, we could haul it out of the woodwork. The government gave us permission to do this, and even thanked us. And off we went. 5 waves of telephonic surveys over the Nitzcram across off the basis of the National Income Dynamics Study, with the exceptional survey team that had been built around our survey work. And then Brendan ran this study during the pandemic, trying to work out vaccine denialism, all of that sort of stuff. Very, very tough research to be doing under COVID conditions, but absolutely crucial. Currently, we're running something called the Health and Aging in Africa Longitudinal Studies in Africa. It's an HRS. It's a health and retirement study nationally run in South Africa off the back of a number of waves of studies that have been done in the Agincourt Demographic Surveillance site. It also has a struggle behind it, right? It's an NIH grant, a massive grant, what's called a PO1 for those of you can name drop that at the cocktail party. It's a PO1. That's a cluster of RO1s. RO1s are big. We write 2 RO1s to fund 2 a number of waves of caps. So it was a huge success and a tribute to SALDRU and all the researchers around this country, especially the vets and the Harvard people, the collaborators, to win the grant. Like a real credit. And we're on our way. We came to the end of year 2 in May, but don't forget, and let's just recap this. It's the National Institutes of Health in the US. It's the US. And it's South Africa. Oh, woe is us. So the survey was suspended, but again, through divine intervention and incredible collaboration across the partners, etc. Through divine intervention, it wasn't cancelled, wasn't formally cancelled. So the American government was told they weren't allowed to do what they'd done to the NIH. And so it's uncancelled. But you can talk about serendipity. So coming through this tail, you need partners and you need to be really good at what you're doing and stuff. But you also need other things. And the people in the NIH who were working with us across this crisis, I almost felt like they were with Imran Patel in the UDF, you know, struggling away, because if they weren't allowed to communicate with us, but they're incredibly supportive of our work. So what do? Well, I'm not going to tell you. But nonetheless, it was reminded me of ugly stories about people hiding under the table in SALDRU. But you did have to write a working paper. Anyway, okay, I've got some pictures here of us doing field work for a reason. This one in particular. So in the Cape Area panel study, we decided we were going to work out, people go back to the Eastern Cape a lot. And decided we were going to work out whether we could actually do a study that traced them back to whether. So how do you do that? Well, you pack Noble Bele, who's still with us and leading our fieldwork team, and David Lamb and one of his PhD students, Susan Godlington, who trained here before she went to Michigan. You go in a car and you go and find these guys, right? Wasn't a big car, it was a teeny little thing. And, you know, you've got to climb over many mountains. Anyway, we did interview some of them, I think. But we worked out that we weren't going to be able to interview enough to make the project worthwhile. But anyway, heroic effort. Okay. So we do have a world-class data set in SALDRU that's ready to serve this country, and that's just worthwhile. So then, this commitment to public release of good data that researchers can use is something that we built over the time. You know, earlier on it was said that Francis, what do you, okay. Having fun. So you heard about Francis's commitment to public release and to capacity building coming out of the PSLSD thing. That it was a world record time. It was turned around for a World Bank survey. But then what about the curated? Well, it was curated at the bank, but it was also in SALDRU from the word go. It was never handed over to the bank, but it wasn't like professional curation. I remember going down and getting my first data classes down there using these data, but it was curated and available for people. And my capacity was being built. But it's now, as you saw earlier, it's now in data first. In this world-class data, so working very hard. It's one of the partnerships that really makes SALDRU able to do what it does. Thank heavens for data first. And you know, the quality of the data and the availability and the data quality, the assessment of the quality of the data that's out there for researchers if they take the time to read. So we can't talk about data first without just reflecting a little bit on marketing. You know, it's a great celebration to us with having Kelly as the director of Data First, but there's a history here. So, you know, Martin's no longer with us, and here he is introducing Angus Deaton at the last lectures. It happened quite quickly, right? And he's having an excellent time in the zone, and he did wonderful things to Data First. And to all of us, he was a little soldier, and we're grateful. So capacity building, including our own. So Ampela says he was a nurturer of talent, and he taught me how to write. So that's Francis. But the broader, and he had the vision, right? But the broader capacity building, right from the early outset, that was other people in SALDRU down at Ealing Hall who were training us, stayed up. but Francis said he put that in place. And so we heard the story earlier. So for those of you that weren't here, of the unfolding of our capacity building and training, it's worth recounting in the context of these things being a public good, therefore hard to fund. Surveys are a public good and they're hard to fund. And I've told you a little bit about the story of the required partnerships to get that going. Well, capacity building is hard to fund as well. And so, again, it was David who wrote some grants and some Mellon grants for training that shifted SALDRU from almost, almost with the move back onto campus. It's got SALDRU into more systemic training and a few visits, etc. And then enter Professor Leibbrandt from Yale with his usual zeal and his graduate students who came to help with that training. And some of you may have had that training with Big Justin, ex-American footballer, Boyd and Jim. It's like world-class people who come to Cape Town, work with us and train, and then David would always be in on something. Here's a picture of the Red Lab, born in 1999, not the Red Lab, the training was born in 1999. Red Lab is just a place on campus. But it's been going since then, right? But it requires institutional support. So Stuart Saunders, the Carnegie, Mellon Foundation, funded 3 times 3 years of support for this training. And he completely accepted our argument that we pushed back. And he said, yeah, you've got to make this thing sustainable, the usual story. Right? Well, if the purpose of the grant is to train people from historically disadvantaged universities, like you can't charge them to come here. You can't do that, right? You've got one of those poverty traps going that I showed you earlier. And he accepted that completely, but within the confines of the donor community, 3 times 3 was already pushing beyond the normal limits. So he was wonderful, and he was very encouraging of other people to step in and take over. But we were in a bit of a part. And then Jim Levinson bumps into William Moses from the Kresge Foundation in Michigan, and tells him a bit about what we're doing here. And Bill Moses, the Kresge Foundation funds infrastructure. That's what they do. And they funded the university library, actually. Yeah, GCT, and a science building at UWC. So Bill comes and visits us, and Jim tells him we're the best thing ever. Lies a little bit. And he comes to visit, and he has this idea, okay, this is so important that we should be thinking about it. We should be endowing this thing. So he puts up a scheme where the Kresge funded it for another 3 years. And then we had 3 years to raise a matching funding for they put down half of what was needed and the matching funding. You understand, right? And so then we were supposed to raise the funding from SALDRU alum in classic American style. Well, we raised about 10 rand. It's not the culture in the country. But nonetheless, Stuart, the Mellon Foundation and the Ford Foundation were absolutely delighted to be able to contribute to top up. And then we did raise a bit more money, actually from Status A2 as well. And so it runs to, it's endowed. Like, think about that, right? And so recently we've been thinking about tweaking it and whatever, but we have endowed capacity to train, and we've tried to use that well and judiciously. Here's a picture of some of us training in Ghana, and now it's SALDRU graduate students and American graduate students and Ghanaian graduate students training about that. But that you can systematize this capacity building, but it requires partnerships for it to really work. And people who are very committed to this. Okay, so we built our own capacity too. This is a picture of SALDRU. Well, not a SALDRU, there'll be some SALDRU. Training at the University of Michigan in the summer of 2003. I was on sabbatical there at the university at the time. And David had written a grant to the NIH, the Fogarty grant, to bring researchers from the South to Michigan, and it particularly favored us. So who's us? Can you spot anybody that you know? Yes, somebody who thought being a dean was a better idea than who's that? Kelly Orrington. Odd question. Who's that?
Cecil.
Cecil. And the rest are from around. And who's that? Mentor. Well, he wasn't in the photo, but he was a graduate student at the University of Michigan at that time. Right, and so this is actually Wim's on a visit to Agincourt at that time. Somebody spoke about his hair going right down to his belt. It was not a polite word earlier. Anyway, I mean, so I'm taking us now to the present, right? The present started back then, in some senses. And that's our capacity building. We built our own capacity, and we had the extraordinary privilege on our research side of collaborating with all of these incredible researchers who also believe in capacity building, but they're world class, but they've got that spirit in them. And government that was really committed to this thing. So in some senses, that's why I speak about SALDRU as a public good. It's one of the points that I wanted to take forward, that you need partnerships to take this forward. You need funding, you need people who believe in what we're doing to carry this forward into the future. So that's a sort of hopefully some of you are feeling your heart moving here. What you reading? Okay, so convening and partnerships. So here's a quote from Leibbrandt Patel, who's sitting in front of us this evening, about Francis. Francis was an excellent economist, but able to use insights he obtained to connect with problems that ordinary people had in the environment. But always stressed evidence-based engagement. And that was the very basis for convenings. For SALDRU's convenings, you had to have something to put on the table to anchor. For SALDRU to have the right to convene. So then we spoke a lot earlier about the second Carnegie inquiry into poverty. And here again, this is a SALDRU link now. All 300 of those papers, about 300, they're up there for you to read the SALDRU website. So with 300, Francis went all around the country. That's when I met Francis. I was an honor student at Rhodes University, and this ball of energy came blitzing through, and he told us about this conference that they were holding the next year, and we should come. We should come. And he said, but don't bother if you're not going to write a paper. Right? That was your entry ticket to the event. You've got to put something on the table, and 300 people put something on the table at the conference. And it was a Francis type convening. There was the researchers, the platform, but look at this. This is the photographs that Omar Bacha collated in a book. There were other broad events, and it was I think it changed everybody who was there, changed their lives. I wasn't there. I was back in the US. It wasn't popular, the second inquiry into poverty. So P.W. Botha wasn't happy. And this is one of the famous SALDRU press clippings, by the way. Right, so lovingly Lynn and Alison found this for me. Lynn probably clipped it. I don't know. I don't want to be rude about your age. So they weren't happy. And I've got other quotes from Hansards where they're grumbling in Parliament about SALDRU, that pesky unit that's straying into politics and away from facts. And then the opposition guy saying, okay, but I don't see a single political statement here. I just see a bunch of statistics. These are facts. Anyway, so an amazing event, an amazing convening, crucially important to this country. It's not so easy to convene these events, though, right? SALDRU's got a particular role. It's bringing its evidence on the table, and you've got credibility with a broad church. So in this article, here's P.W. Botha trying to be mischievous, because at the conference there was very rigorous debate about anything good that might be happening in the Bantustans. Not any improvement in living standards, that was unacceptable. And so there was very rigorous discussion about a paper by Charles Simpkins. There was other rigorous discussion, and the discussion was more about, well, we know this can't be true, but you can't do evidence both ways, right? Didn't mean things were good. The whole conference was very damning about what was going on in the Bantustans, but you can't then anesthetize. So, and Francis had to navigate that, and that's where I'm going to come back to, Lindy. I think that sort of stress and strain of navigating that in that political just crucial. But anyway, we've done some of this by ourselves in our group. There's something called Towards Carnegie 3, which never really happened. They had a fabulous conference exactly. It was Francis's return almost. He was finished all of his work. He was sitting in SALDRU. He was asked by the Vice Chancellor to convene this thing called Towards Carnegie 3, with the idea being it would be spectacular, which it was. 500 people, 2012, hosted at UCT. Again, there were photographic exhibitions. It was the usual SALDRU story. And big policy buy-in, but Carnegie didn't want to do that. They didn't want to be the partner coming along with it, probably for good reasons. You know, they should have, if they didn't send Francis, that's why Carnegie didn't. Anyway, but then Trevor, Manuel, and Mampela got involved directly and persuaded the Mandela Foundation that they needed to come on board for this initiative. This country needed this. This was the Zuma era. We needed this. We needed SALDRU to play its role, but we'd started a national convening, and let's continue with it. And so we did do this. And we ran it all the way to 2018 with the foundation, and then the foundation were going to carry it forward in their own way. We held the closing conference on the day, but in the week that President Zuma was told to leave office. And so there was all this hard work telling us what needed to be done in our country. Although earlier on, Trevor said he didn't think it had a lot of impact, that wounded me to my core. We were ready to go. We'd done all these engagements. We worked with communities, examples of good practice, etc. And then, but there was this hubris about this country. Thank heavens, right? And so anyway, the Carnegie, the Mandela Initiative didn't have a huge follow-on impact. Let me say a little bit about policy research, just by way of that partnership at the policy side. We've mentioned this a few times today, this amazing moment, I think, for SALDRU in our period, where COVID hit and we had people in government, Kate Phillip and Rudy, in particular, who were in impossible odds. They had like 2 weeks to deliver some policy initially. And we were just most fortunate to be able to respond to that with some of the young Turks that are going to be, you'll be doing the SALDRU at 150. Just responded so beautifully and worked in this amazing partnership with Kate. But that whole process we had the business community on board. That emergency process just made it quite remarkable that you could get this consensus around these things. But the academic work underneath all of that was coming from us. And what I'm particularly proud about, actually, is not very long after that, we tested this in the journals, right? We don't want to be taking things into the policy community that aren't good enough. That's our obligation to our society. If you want to have these broader impacts, it's a glorious harmony rather than an obligation. But academic excellence and impact are just completely aligned in a very, very wonderful way. And so I think many of our SALDRU researchers, all those guys that were at Michigan are now all professors here in SALDRU. They're all excellent. And it's been so heartening today to listen to them talk. And they will carry forward the SALDRU flag so beautifully. But that's an example of a policy engagement that we've been really blessed with over the last few years. Incredible partnerships, like with the AFD, for example. We've done so much together with the same spirit of common cause and many, many others. Our point about that is we achieve so much more. The impact of the policy are so much higher, but the return on investment from government in investing in this infrastructure is also so much higher. That's what you want out of these things. I don't know what sort of solution that is to a public good problem, but it's a very nice solution anyway, because there are real returns to our society and to government from doing this, particularly when it's nested in the way Mastura nested the NITS thing, with capacity building and roping in the broader community as well. The returns just get way, way higher for the same investment. The marginal cost of all of these things is very small relative to the big cost. Okay, I'm almost done. Thank you for bearing with me. I'll finish by not saying much about SALDRU Beyond, but here's our Christmas party last year. It can't be this year. And I just want to make a point. So you'll recognize all the faces that you saw back at Michigan and more. And also the incredible SALDRU administration, the infrastructure that enables us to be good researchers. And they've got the same heart. Brenda Adams was here earlier, right? SALDRU's old administrator for so many years. And we've got Tanya, we've got Algeria, quite the best research manager in the country. And they're all on fire for the same thing. And it's a wonderful place to be. And here we have Bill, take two, with Lindy Wilson. So this is the continuity that we want, right? So somebody at some stage is going to give a Francis Wilson Memorial Lecture and have to say a lot because they don't really know who Francis was. It'll happen. Right? At some point, but that's somebody else's problem. It's not our problem. Today, we had the most wonderful convening of people who do know who Francis Wilson was. And in fact, they're the broad diaspora that have walked along in their own way. Not everybody's been right inside SALDRU, right? Some are in the policy space. And some of you online, you're all over the world. You're our diaspora. And And it's a wonderful moment, right? You heard our director talking so inspirationally, actually, about the unit and building on exactly these platforms that I have sketched out for you. But us all these, final comment, us all these are not done yet, right? We're part of the SALDRU diaspora. You come to an event like this, and you get rekindled to do the work that you're supposed to be doing. But maybe you're not in your same job anymore. I hope you feel that way. I hope you feel that way. I certainly feel that way going forward, that you get motivated to go forward. And Vimal made the point just now, actually, that our usefulness hasn't gone. At the South Africa 30 conference in early April this year, we huddled together almost, like the academic community, the policy community, huddled together in a big hall in the building next door. In the week that it looked like our government of national unity was falling apart, and in the week that President Trump first started his tariff stuff and was disrupting the global community immensely. And here we were, once again, sitting in a SALDRU convening thinking, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? You know, and Trevor Manuel made some closing remarks at the conference in the midst of a very long speech. But, some closing remarks that were really very, very good, because I wanted him to talk about the Planning Commission. And he said, Murray wanted me to talk about the Planning Commission. That's such a silly thing to do. He said, this is not a moment where you plan, right? Like in a technical exercise, like a planner, right? Everything's falling apart in this world. What we need to do is talk about how we're going to make, how we're going to steer ourselves, how we're going to give ourselves and our countries adaptive abilities to respond, abilities to carve their own way here. How are we going to do that? It's not a technical planning moment. It's a moment for us to use all of our data and craft solutions that are tailor-made to our society. And so I'll end on that note and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Murray. Excellent talk. I'm not going to talk for long at all. I want to say thank you. It's been an incredible day. Everyone has participated in the various actions that we've had. It's just amazing to see so many stories and characters and so much goodwill and the relationships that we have had and enjoyed and will continue to nurture. So thank you. And yeah. Hey, sorry. Get some wine. Kelly needs to, oh, he's standing. Who's he? Okay. She's going to go. Darren Dinkelman from Notre Dame is giving a prize to the data first. Francis Wilson.
Tasting the wine already.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Taryn Dinkelman. Callie asked me to say a few short words to award the Francis Wilson Memorial Prize for data-driven research. I chair the program committee. So the late Martin Wittenberg asked me about 3 years ago to chair the committee to award this prize. And so together with Professor Emeritus from the University of Michigan, David Lamb, and Professor of Economics at Williams College, Susie Goddington, we reviewed I think 9 or 10 papers. We chose two different papers, one for an article and one for the best master's or PhD thesis or chapter. And just to say a few words about the prize, this prize is made to honor the legacy of Francis Wilson. There are two prizes of 10,000 Rand each for outstanding research that makes innovative use of publicly available data. The submissions need to use publicly available data and acknowledge this publicly usable data through use through data first. And essentially, we're looking for papers that are tackling important social or economic issues with high quality research using this publicly available data. So I'm going to, first of all, award the article prize. I believe the author of this prize is not here tonight. We have awarded the prize to Yuxing Yi from Wits University. She's at the School of Economics. It's a prize for a paper that is jointly co-authored with Stephen Koch and Jianming Yi for their paper, The Effect of Temperature on Household Electricity Consumption, Evidence from South Africa, published in the journal Energy in 2025. So this piece of collaborative work is a collaboration between economists and an engineer. And we really like this paper because it used a novel matched data set, a new data set, matching data from the South African Weather Service with household level energy consumption called the DELS data set, which is available through Data First. One of the things that this paper documents is actually a new pattern of the relationship between temperature and household energy consumption from rural areas in South Africa. This is a fact that has not yet been documented in the data, which is why this paper ended up being published in a very high-ranking energy journal. So I guess we can congratulate the author, Yuxing. And then the second prize is for the dissertation prize and is awarded to Chipang Kumalo from Stellenbosch University. And I believe that Chipang is here tonight. Is she here? Okay, so before you come up, I'm going to tell people a little bit about the paper. And I believe your graduation was actually today. So So we awarded this prize for a paper entitled The Mental Health Impacts of Adolescents Aging Out of South Africa's Child Support Grant. Chipang's dissertation focuses on how different social policies in South Africa impact well-being and health. Now, the literature, for those of you who don't know, the literature on evaluation of social programs has really exploded in developing countries recently. Chipang's dissertation work brings a very new and important set of questions to this literature. In particular, the chapter for which the award is given asks about how the mental health of grant recipients is impacted when these grants disappear. She examines the impact of the child support grant, leveraging timing of the increase in the age eligibility to look at the ending of this grant on mental health among adolescents. She's able to do this using the South African NIDS data from 2010 to 2017. What she finds is that when the child support grant disappears as beneficiaries age out of eligibility, their depressive symptoms actually increase. She looks at mechanisms and she finds that the deterioration in mental health is related to increased anxiety and worry, increased pressure to enter the labor market, and concerns about school dropout. So these are really important findings. The committee was enthusiastic about the paper because the results point to a very neglected aspect of social protection, what happens when these social programs disappear. As a testament to the strength of this paper and the rigor of the work, it is currently R&R, and hopefully you guys will be able to turn it into a publication in one of the top field journals in development economics, the Journal of Development Economics. And I think we should congratulate Dr. Kumalo.
Thank you so much. And on that note, those proceedings, go and get some drinks upstairs.
Enjoy your next.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, no, no.